We'll focus on some 2024 NHL Draft eligibles, including Matvei Shuravin, a scouting report for him. In our first segment, we'll talk about some of the Swedish prospects, even though it's not really their year. And then we'll end things off with Cole Beaudoin and Henry Mews, which we caught a live viewing of, all coming up on today's show on Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll talk about a bunch of 2024s. We'll start off with Matvei Shuravin, who showed up really high in Corey Pronman's rankings for the 2024 NHL Draft. We caught a viewing of his recently. We'll talk about his game a bit more in detail. In our second segment, we'll talk about some Swedish prospects. It's not really the year for proper Swedes. I mean, we've got Michael Brandsäck-Nygård, who is Norwegian but playing in the Swedish leagues. But in terms of Swedish nationals, not much to talk about this year, but we'll cover a couple of them just to give you an idea of what to expect there. And then finally, in our third segment, we'll talk about Cole Beaudoin and Henry Mews, a couple of decent prospects who could make the first round for the 2024 draft. But before we get into any of that, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get up to $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get things started here with Matvei Shuravin. You caught a couple games of his recently. You've definitely watched him more than I have. As kind of the more Euro-based of the two here. We're both heads of scouting at Dauber Prospects. I handle more of the North American side. You handle more of the Euro side. And Shravin's right in your ballpark and seems like a prospect that I thought you would like when I first caught him. I watched a game of his, was really comfortable with his kind of composure and calmness on the puck. And his intelligence is really obvious. But yeah, talk me through a bit what you saw from Shuravin, what you like, and what you want him to work on heading into the draft.
Yeah, so the game I watched was against Novosibirsk in the KHL. He played about 12 minutes, and he looked really impressive in this targeted viewing. It's my second one this season that I've logged. That was a full in-depth one, not just in passing. And I was really impressed with the consistency of his intelligence, his composure, his decision-making under pressure. He looked the part of a KHL regular, did not stand out as a particularly youthful player.
Yeah.
His style of play is one that is really founded on his intelligence and on intelligent decision-making. And while the tools, I think, are definitely not quite at the same level as what you might expect for a player that is found in some first-round rankings this early on in the season,
yeah,
he does have the brain to mitigate that. And I think what stood out most to me in this viewing was that he consistently found solutions to kind of patch up his tool limitations to solve problems. He was always taking the smartest and most efficient route to loose pucks all over the ice in all three zones, and was consistently winning races to the puck despite not being a very sound skater. His skating mechanics definitely need some work. He is primarily an inside edge skater, and his ankles definitely bend inwards and are kind of flayed. Definitely lacks control in that stride, and it means that sometimes he can get a good start with a good first stride and then he's off to the races, and other times it's a false start and he kind of flounders. So the skating definitely needs some more work to be a bit more consistent and more reliable as a tool. And he's not a great handler. This isn't a player that's going to be overly dynamic or create offense with every puck touch, but he consistently puts the puck in a better place than where it started. He's a good player in terms of distributing from the blue line. He might not be overly aggressive and pinch over the hash marks, but he will consistently try to shift angles, try to shift defensive structures, get the puck to a teammate that has the tools to kind of like puncture holes into them.
Yeah.
And overall played a very mature style in this KHL game. And I think for a young rookie KHL defenseman, there are far worse things that you can do than play a composed brand of hockey, just consistently playing every minute and not hurting your team and putting the puck in better spots. So
Yeah.
may not have been the most like flashy viewing in the world that I had here, but if this decision making and the composure are real facets of his game that continue throughout this season, I think I will make an argument for him inside our first round and later boards. I think at this point in the season, maybe more honorable mention territory for me outside our first round, but he's definitely within that conversation for me because the brain is really quite impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the main thing is, when you have a player whose intelligence is at the crux of what you see from him in terms of performances, you really want that intelligence to be a consistent element. Because tools can be flashy, tools can come and go, and that's fine. But as long as you see those flashes, you can work on kind of bringing that up. But with intelligence, you want to make sure that it's not kind of a one-off in your viewing, and you want to make sure that, this is something that you see from them every game, because that is a better indicator of a player who has that in their skill set. If your player is consistently making good decisions, consistently getting to soft areas and making those plays really well, I think it's a lot more indicative of something that is an integral part of their toolkit, because I don't like inconsistent intelligence as much as I like inconsistent tools. But yeah, with Shuravin, you're getting a defenseman who, in my opinion, definitely has that kind of bottom pair upside. Definitely has that kind of ability to make plays at a decent enough level, especially in the KHL game that I caught. I saw a player who really definitely has that that floor as part of their game, but it's just a matter of how much you can build off of his toolkit, because it's really not the most impressive. It's not the type of thing where you really see him carrying the puck end to end or deking through a player or making a pass through a screen, or his shot isn't particularly strong or accurate from the point. So it's just a matter of how he gets those looks. And I think especially working on his activation game and getting involved more deeply in the offensive zone will really bring out some of that intelligence, because like you said, he's really calm and composed on the puck, but a lot of the plays he's making right now in the KHL are from areas where he doesn't really need it. So once he gets in those kind of more intricate, more pressured areas, I think that's going to kind of uplift his skill set as well and force him basically to add some things to his toolkit that aren't there yet. But yeah, what's your kind of projection for Shuravin so far in the games that you've watched?
In terms of draft or NHL upside?
Both.
In terms of draft upside, probably top 45 at this point. Like that, probably that 35 to 45 range is where I feel most comfortable slotting him in this early on this season. I think if we see him play, I think so far he's only logged 2 KHL games with over 10 minutes, and I've watched both. If that becomes more consistent of him getting bigger minutes and, as you said, taking on bigger challenges and forcing himself to get into uncomfortable situations to like really leverage his skills to create advantages, then yes, I'll start making those top 32 arguments. But for the moment, I'll say top half the second round. And NHL upside, I think the debate here is whether it's that number 4, number 5 defenseman realistically, whether he can be that second piece on a second pairing and consistently make those smart decisions and mainly be able to facilitate play for a more skilled, dynamic pairing mate, or whether he can more be that leader in the break on the third pairing. So that's kind of where I'm at with Shuravin so far. I'd love for the tools to make me to force me to reconsider that evaluation and push for a higher upside as the year goes on. But for the time being, I'm gonna hedge my bets a little bit here.
Yeah, makes sense, absolutely. But that wraps it up for our first segment. We'll talk about some Swedes in our second segment. Kind of talk about why it's not really working out as well as we thought it would for the Swedish kind of program. If you're looking for a solution that helps you stay on top of your medical needs, Jace Medical has you covered. They offer the Jace case, which is a case of 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. It offers help with anything from sinus infections to ear infections to any infection you've got going on. They can help you with that in terms of the Jace case. All it takes to get a Jace case is just simply to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, sometimes you'll have to jump on a call with one of their licensed physicians, and before you know it, you've got a Jace case coming in the mail. You can get ongoing care from their physicians as well, and any questions you have about treatment, any issues you've got with your medications, you can take care of that through Jace Medical and their online evaluation. So don't get caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to be able to take care of themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. With shortages in terms of supply chains, with everything going on around the world, you want to stay on top of your supply chains for medication. And Jace handles everything from online eval to licensed pharmacy medication, and ongoing consultation and care. So you can use the code locked on at checkout to get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics today at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Check it out. All right, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about some Swedes that are, in the conversation for the 2024 NHL Draft. I don't see anyone in the first round really as a kind of proper, concrete kind of first rounder. But you watched a Swede recently that kind of caught your eye. Talk me through Pettersson's game overall.
Yeah, Lucas Pettersson's a pretty fun two-way center. He's
Mhm.
quite intelligent, has a decent motor, is not the most perhaps like dynamic or overtly skilled player in the world, but uses his skills in a calculated manner to leverage them as much as he can.
Yeah.
Wouldn't say this is a player that has like significant top six potential, but I can see a future third liner here in theory. And he's getting quite big minutes with that Swedish U18 team. He's one of their standout players, having already logged 9 points in 7 U18 international games this season, as to go along with 24 and 19 U20 games, and having played 1 SHL game so far. And in those junior games, I've seen a player who, when confident, can really flash that quick decision making. He has good habits of finding space in the offensive zone. He's constantly moving off puck, trying to get open, trying to shift defenses over to create space for teammates. He's a really good supporter of the line, especially in transition. He's always an outlet option when his wingers get pressured. He can carry up the puck himself as well. He's a decent enough skater. I've seen a lot of fun aspects of his game, but I really am waiting on those SHL viewings to start to trickle in to more contextualize how that skill then applies in professional contexts, because we've seen many flashy J20 draft eligibles kind of fumble when it comes to stepping it up to the next levels in the past. And while I do think that Pettersson has a nice foundation of intelligence and defensive engagement that I think will help him a lot in that transition, it remains mainly theoretical at this point. So I'm waiting for those viewings to come in before really making a push for him higher up in our draft boards. I think as of right now, I'd probably also have him in that like 35 to 45 range, maybe honorable mention territory. If we have our meeting tomorrow, from the time of recording, we'll see how that goes. I might bring his name up, but I'm not gonna be banging the table for him in this slot just yet. But definitely, of all the Swedes I've watched so far, he's the one that's piqued my interest the most, more so than I know. Like one other one that is in contention here is Leo Sahlin Wallenius, who's a fairly good skater, has some nice flashes offensively, but I think I've been a little bit like lukewarm on just how translatable that offensive like flash is at this stage. Again, also has only really been flashed at the J20 level so far this season. But what's your take on him?
I mean, I'm a bit more warm on him than you are, and he's still in my honorable mentions. That gives you a good idea of like the Swedish the Swedish element of this draft not being as prominent. Sahlin Wallenius has really impressed me at times with some flashes, and I really mean flashes of playmaking ability from the point. He's definitely an active defenseman. Loves to close down on the slot. Loves to activate down the boards in the offensive zone. And has that kind of dare to his game, and he's got a decent enough kind of hidden. He has this ability to hide his passes that's really good and looks off a lot of his passes in the offensive zone, and that opens up a lot of space, especially at the J20 level, in terms of putting those passes through pockets of space onto a teammate's stick who's open on the other side, and his teammates seem very much in tune with what he's doing, which means that he probably does this a lot and very regularly. So that's another thing I look for in defensemen is how often are they finding players in areas where only the teammate knows they're going to be receiving that pass, and that's very often with Sahlin Wallenius. Um, on top of that, he's decent in terms of mobility, but sometimes he does get caught flat-footed, mainly because he tends to identify when he needs to pivot a tiny bit late, and that allows faster players on larger ice to just get around him fairly easily. But I think that's going to be mitigated on shorter ice against competition that can is more his speed, because a lot of the players in the Swedish J20 level are very quick and use space really well in transition. But I feel like if he moves to a league that has a bit more speed, so for example, if he moves to the OHL, the WHL, and gets a stint in a Canadian junior league on shorter ice, I think that's going to be a bit better for him to identify when to pivot. But yeah, there's some kind of areas of concern with his game. Overall, the defensive play is decent, but not overwhelming. But yeah, I see him as a player who could very well develop his playmaking ability into a more consistent element. And then we're talking about probably a middle pairing player who connects plays fairly well in transition. So yeah, I've been fairly impressed with what he's kind of brought to the table. I've watched a fair bit of Simon Zetter as well, and I haven't really seen anything there that indicates that we're talking about a kind of first round player. Even though he was an honorable mention on Elite Prospects board, I don't really see the quality there. And one player I see, funnily enough, brought up a lot in these conversations is Alexander Zetterberg. And
Yeah.
we're talking about a player that, a gust of wind can bring him back to the bench. Like, he is very much frail, and he's being bullied by players at the J20 level. And usually I'm not a big, proponent of size equals skill. But in Alexander Zetterberg's case, it's just he doesn't have the escapability. He doesn't have any escape skills, and hasn't really tailored his game around that kind of one-touch quick play in order to not spend a lot of time on the puck in vulnerable positions. He gets caught with his head down a lot. And even though he's a fantastic playmaker, he's a fantastic kind of surveyor of the ice and sees the play really well, the time he spends on the puck is time where he's vulnerable, and he hasn't really identified that yet. So I don't really see a compensatory skill in his skill set that allows him to kind of compensate for that lack of size, the lack of physical ability, and the lack of escapability. So I don't see a first rounder at all in Zetterberg. I don't know if you're kind of on the same page regarding that.
Yeah, I wouldn't bring him up in that discussion of top 64 either just yet. I don't think. Like, I've watched a decent amount of him, and he's quite fun. Like, I quite enjoy watching him play. I think he's entertaining with the puck on his stick. He tries some things that can be really, really effective at times against J20 competition. Like, the execution of some of his passes can be really impressive.
Yeah.
And those flashes are brilliant, but he's already resorting to his anticipation being his only problem-solving tool against J20 competition, and being physically overwhelmed. He's overwhelmed in both time and space often, and that is not really what you can have when you are built like Alexander Zetterberg is. Like, he need in order to make a push in high-end draft rankings, he would have to add about 3 like adaptable skills to his toolkit that he can whip out at any moment to solve problems, because he's struggling to solve problems against J20 competition right now, and I don't think he's going to get the chance to show off his chops against SHL competition anytime soon.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'd be very surprised with that. But yeah, that wraps things up for our second segment. Then we'll talk a bit about Cole Beaudoin and Henry Mews, a couple of 2024 NHL Draft prospects who are making a push for the latter half of our first round. We'll talk about that and a lot more here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet on Moneyline. That's $150 if your team wins. And you can use that on anything, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and more. Whether you want to bet on your favorite team winning a game, or your favorite quarterback throwing for 3 touchdowns, the choice is yours with FanDuel. So visit fanduel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so ending things off with a discussion on Cole Beaudoin and Henry Mews, a couple of players you caught live recently. And those are two players I've been fairly interested in since the start of the year. So we'll talk about them in more detail and kind of break down what makes them so good. We'll start with Cole Beaudoin. Cole Beaudoin is a player that I've been kind of following closely since the Hlinka Gretzky Cup. Caught my first viewings of him there, and I was really impressed with the puck protection ability, with the two-way game, with the ability to get off the boards and make plays. Overall, just a very interesting package of skills. Not really the most toolsy player. I don't think his playmaking is high end. His shot's pretty decent. But overall, a player who can kind of impact the game in multiple areas and make himself effective as a complementary piece on the line, don't you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the viewing I had of Beaudoin, he stood out for his physicality and his defensive chops. That may have been because his team was on the penalty kill for about a third of the entire game, and he got
Yeah.
many opportunities to show off his abilities in the defensive zone, especially against the cycle. And he stood out quite positively. He got undressed by Luca Pinelli once, but that's been most OHL players this year, so
Yeah.
can't really fault him too much for that. But he looked good, and defensively, he was consistently taking like the face-offs on the penalty kill, mainly on the second unit in that game. But he was a consistent positive influence. I liked how aggressive he was in pressuring the attackers, even on the penalty kill. He's not afraid to take some risks and to commit when he sees an opening where he can strike and try to make possession a little bit more tumultuous for the power play. And yeah, he stood out well in that facet. Offensively, he was a bit more muted, but that can be said for the entirety of Barrie in that game. Even having players like Bo Jelsma and notably Edvard Schala, there wasn't a consistent amount of offense being created in that game because Ottawa has been a kind of surprise this season, being really tough to play against and like a real pain for any team to face, especially at home. Ottawa's been excellent this season. And yeah, but that said, Beaudoin stood out well. I thought that the puck protection, as you mentioned, was a clear skill. The physicality, the off-puck habits, I thought were intelligent, both defensively and offensively. He gets parked up in space, right up in the bumper spot on the cycle at even strength and on the power play, constantly looking for space where he can get off a good release because it is his best offensive tool. Like the handling and playmaking aren't going to be difference makers, but the physicality, shooting, inside game, everything in the dirty areas is what Beaudoin can do quite well.
Yeah.
And he's definitely finding his niche there this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been really impressed, like you said, with the puck protection. That's mainly his main offensive toolkit. And we're talking about a player who, yes, is 6'2", 200 pounds, but I feel like he leverages his weight a lot better than a lot of 6'2", 200
Oh, yeah.
pound OHL draft eligibles.
He looks like 6'3" and 220 on the ice. Like he looks like, in terms of the practical employment of the physical tools, he's one of the better ones in the OHL for sure.
Oh, for sure. Leaning into players, using his anchor leg in order to push into players' shoulders and kind of get them off balance while leaning on them for pressure while protecting a puck. He can protect the puck with one hand and kind of shoo off a defenseman's stick with the other. Like the way he cuts across players, there's so many different kind of individual tools in this puck protection toolkit that have so much more to do than just with size. And that's one thing I usually reproach to a lot of bigger guys, that they rely exclusively on their size to protect pucks. But that's not the case for Beaudoin. He's big and he protects pucks well, which is exactly what you want to look for there. So he's definitely making a push for that kind of later end of my first round, but there's a lot of players I kind of value a tiny bit more so far. So I have in my honorable mentions. But Henry Mews is a guy that I think we both have kind of in the same range. You might have him a bit higher than me. Henry Mews is a defenseman out of the Ottawa 67s. Talk me through what you've seen from his game so far, because you catch a lot of Ottawa games. You've probably gotten more viewings on him than any prospect I've watched. So talk me through his game. Let me know kind of what you liked about what he does well and what you want him to work on in order to kind of solidify his upside.
The tools with Mews are really impressive. Like it's very easy to see why he was being ranked inside the top 10 of rankings from 6 months ago, a year ago, year and a half ago, going back. He's been pretty much a staple in that top 10, top 15 range going backwards in time. But Right now, I think the consensus wise, he's more of a later first round pick, and I think that's more but fair with how he's actually been playing in the OHL. The toolkit is really impressive, but he has this high-end mobility. He's a really great playmaker. He's constantly looking for passes to the slot. He's patient in possession, looks to shift defensive structures to kind of access those different passing lanes. But he still needs to add a lot of tools to that deceptive toolkit to make it really projectable to the NHL level. He needs to use more delays and more dynamic shifts in order to poke consistent holes in defensive structures. Like what he's doing right now works against OHL defenses, but won't work against AHL defenses. But he is a bit concentrated on the perimeter with his playmaking. And that said, I'm still a really big fan of this player. I still see a player with a tremendous amount of upside because I think a big reason for it is that I've seen so many players be limited by the system in Ottawa. And that may be a really dumb thing to say considering how good Ottawa's been in the OHL. And I think that Ottawa's systems are quite good for kind of creating those gritty environments where you can kind of just like pummel away and get and grind out a victory. That's what Ottawa is kind of built to do, which disadvantages the skilled players. So last season, we saw it with Luca Pinelli not getting a single game at center, being used only as a shooter on the power play, getting very few puck touches, being primarily left to be an off puck player. And this season, that's been very different, thankfully. And we've seen that with his production, but he was being limited by that more traditionalist system. And the same thing can be said with Pavel Mintyukov even last season. Like we talked about this player yesterday, and in the NHL, he's showing this dynamism. But last year with Ottawa, he was very clearly told to stick closer to the blue line, limit his offensive engagements, be less aggressive, be more safe. And it made him a lot less fun to watch. But we've seen that it has actually not hampered his development and perhaps even aided it, right? Like we now see a Mintyukov who's a lot more controlled chaos. And I think one of my arguments with Mews is that we might see a very similar thing of once he's out of this environment where he is being very clearly constantly told to dial it back and play it safe and to not take those big risks that you typically want to see your skilled draft eligibles taking. That maybe in 2 years, once he's out of that environment, he will have then the foundation of the game to play with all that skill that's just kind of been pent up. But that is a little bit of a hope internally for me. And one of the reasons why I think that I might value Mews a little bit higher, because I really do believe that he will shine more brightly in an environment where he is told to be creative and to try things. But at that point, we're getting into theoretical futures of also where does he get drafted and so on and so forth, which makes ranking way more of a meta thing than should be. But he's a fun, skilled player that I think has a lot more offense to unlock than he's shown so far. And even if he doesn't, he has the mobility to cover defensive ice, and he keeps a tight gap. He applies good pressure in the defensive zone. Could show more aggression, more decisiveness in that aspect too, for sure. But I like the foundation of skill here, and I think that he has more upside than any other player that we're talking about in that range.
For sure. He's going to be a very interesting one to keep an eye on as the season goes on. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on in sports around the world. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we continue our prospects content. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.